You don't wake up wanting to die. You just stop wanting to live. It happens quietly, so quietly that even your own thoughts forget to scream. There's a particular fatigue that doesn't live in your body, but in the space between your memories and your reflection. It's not sadness, not even despair. It's the steady erosion of meaning, one heartbeat at a time. And you start to wonder what exactly is left of a person who feels everything and nothing at once. You've become too aware. Every second, every movement, every thought carries its own echo. Hyper-awareness is supposed to mean insight, but in truth, it's a curse of consciousness. Psychologists call it depersonalization, when your own existence feels like a distant observation. You don't inhabit your body. You watch it move. You analyze every conversation, every silence, until the meaning leaks out and leaves only analysis behind. Awareness was meant to liberate you, yet it became a cage of mirrors, each one reflecting another reflection. You thought self-improvement would bring clarity, but now it only sharpens the edges of your disconnection. Tell me, how do you heal when the very act of noticing your pain makes it worse? There was a time when ambition felt like oxygen. Now it feels like smoke thin, suffocating, impossible to grasp. Psychologists call it anhedonia, the loss of pleasure, the blunting of drive. You still move through your routines. You still smile when required, but there's no pulse behind the performance. Every goal that once glittered now feels like dust, and the praise of others echoes through a hollow chest. You tell yourself it's burnout, that rest will fix it, but rest only deepens the numbness. You've optimized, journaled, meditated, reframed, and yet the emptiness adapts, learning your every trick. What happens when self-improvement becomes just another ritual of decay? You chase progress like a mirage, measuring worth in checklists and milestones. Every achievement gives you a brief pulse of validation before dissolving into the same gray numbness. Psychologists describe this as the hedonic treadmill, the relentless adaptation to what once made you happy. Improvement becomes addiction. The more you grow, the more you feel the absence of meaning in growth itself. You polish the walls of your prison and call it evolution. You tell yourself you're better, now healthier, wiser, stronger, but each version of better feels eerily identical to the one before. What if progress was never meant to save you, but to distract you from realizing you were never lost? You've worn so many masks in pursuit of being understood that you've forgotten what your face feels like. Every personality test, every label, every self-definition was supposed to bring you closer to yourself. But identity, once dissected, bleeds ambiguity. Psychologists call this ego diffusion, the fragmentation of self, when the boundaries between who I am and who I perform has collapsed. You've become fluent in self-description, but illiterate in self-connection. The more precisely you define yourself, the less real you feel. You used to fear being misunderstood. Now you fear there's nothing left to understand. Tell me, if every version of you is an adaptation, which one do you think was ever real? You've read enough psychology to know every label that might apply to you: burnout, depression, existential fatigue. You can name your wounds in clinical language, but knowledge doesn't soothe. It sterilizes. Awareness turns pain into data, and data has no empathy. You monitor your mental state like a scientist observing decay in a petri dish, detached yet fascinated by your own deterioration. Self-awareness was supposed to bring healing, but instead, it made you endlessly accountable to your own suffering. You've become both patient and therapist, experiment and experimenter. And in this double role, there's no room left to simply be. So tell me, when your entire mind is self-observation, who exactly is left to live the life being observed? You used to cry easily. Now even grief feels mechanical, like an echo of an emotion once felt. Psychologists call it emotional blunting, a defense that begins as protection and ends as paralysis. You've learned to mute yourself to survive the noise of living. But in doing so, you silence the last traces of aliveness. The world still moves, laughter, color, chaos, but it slides past you, unregistered. You envy those who feel pain deeply, because at least pain still proves existence. You wonder if numbness is peace, or simply the corpse of feeling. What if the reason you can't feel anymore isn't because you've healed, but because you've finally become too tired to? You avoid mirrors now, not because you hate your reflection, but because you no longer recognize it. The person staring back looks rehearsed, like a ghost trying to remember how to appear human. Psychologists link this to derealization, when the world and even the self feels unreal. You touch your face, your chest, your pulse, just to confirm you still exist. But the confirmation fades as soon as you look away. You used to think identity was a core, something solid. Now it feels like vapor. You perform humanity out of habit, not conviction. How long before even your reflection grows tired of pretending to be you? You understand too much now. You see the hidden reasons behind people's words, the trauma behind their cruelty, the fear beneath their kindness. Empathy once made you compassionate. Now it only isolates you. You can't hate anyone anymore, not even those who hurt you, because you see the psychology behind their damage. But understanding isn't healing. It's distance. You no longer belong to the simple world of good and bad, right and wrong. You live in the gray fog between excuses and empathy, where everything makes sense but nothing matters. So tell me, when comprehension replaces connection, is that wisdom? Or just another way to disappear? Every decision now feels like a trap. Psychologists call it decision fatigue, but it's more than tiredness, it's paralysis. You've analyzed every possible outcome, weighed every potential regret, and yet the very act of choosing drags meaning from your life. Freedom, once a gift, is now a burden heavier than chains. Even trivial choices, the cup of coffee, the route home, the words you speak feel monumental, because every action confirms your presence in a reality you wish you could exit. You try to defer, to postpone, to hide in routine, but the mind rebels, reminding you that you still exist. How long can someone bear the weight of choices when each one feels like proof of futility? There's a version of you that never grew tired. You sense them sometimes, just beyond memory laughing, curious, untouched by the corrosion of awareness. Psychologists might call it self-discrepancy theory, the pain that arises when your real self diverges from your ideal one. But this isn't theory. It's mourning. You grieve for a life you never lived, a person you might have been if the world hadn't taught you exhaustion. You keep hoping that rediscovery lies somewhere ahead, but the further you walk, the more the past rots behind you. You can't return, and you can't move forward without dragging ghosts. So tell me, what happens when even your potential gives up on you? You don't fantasize about death anymore. You fantasize about absence, the idea of simply not having to exist. Psychologists sometimes call it passive suicidal ideation, but that label feels too neat for something so quietly seductive. You don't want to die. You just want the noise to stop. The obligations, the expectations, the endless mirrors of self-analysis. You imagine fading slowly, unnoticed, like breath on cold glass. Not tragedy, just relief. You tell yourself it's only a thought, a coping mechanism. But even the thought carries warmth now, doesn't it? If silence could take shape, would it look like you finally at peace? Or simply erased? You once thought your mind was a home. Now it feels like a labyrinth designed by something that despises you. Every hallway loops back into memory. Every doorway leads to analysis. Cognitive psychology calls this rumination the repetitive cycling of thought that traps you inside unresolved pain. You think to understand, but thinking only deepens the wound. You pick apart every word you've said, every silence you've allowed, until even your memories begin to sound foreign. You keep walking in circles, hoping the center holds meaning, but all you find is more reflection, more echoes, more mirrors. Tell me, what if the only way out of the maze is to stop wanting to escape it at all? You don't count the days anymore. You endure them. Time has dissolved into sameness, a slow-motion blur that psychologists call chronic disengagement. It's not traumatic like depression, not visible enough to alarm anyone. It's quieter, heavier. You exist in maintenance mode, performing the bare minimum of living. The dishes get washed, the emails get answered, but behind every small act is a vast emptiness where desire used to live. The world keeps moving as if you're still part of it, but you feel like a placeholder, occupying a life that no longer belongs to you. If time keeps passing even when you've stopped participating, what exactly is it that continues in your place? You no longer experience life, you observe it, detached, like a documentary you've already seen too many times. Every event, every conversation, unfolds with the dull inevitability of something predetermined. Psychologists describe this sensation as learned helplessness, the state born when effort no longer changes outcome. You've learned not to expect anything different, so you stop trying altogether. The detachment feels almost rational. Now, why invest in a script that never rewrites itself? You drift through your own existence, half participant, half ghost, and the distinction between living and watching blurs. If the world no longer feels like yours to affect, does that mean you've stopped existing, or simply stopped caring that you do? You've deconstructed everything: purpose, love, success, even the idea of healing. Each concept unravels under scrutiny until all that's left is the framework of nothingness. Psychologists tie this to existential nihilism, the collapse of meaning under relentless self-inquiry. You tried to build a philosophy out of despair, but meaning resists reconstruction. It demands belief, and belief is what you lost first. Now even beauty feels suspect, as if joy were a trick of neural chemistry. You used to ask what life means. Now you ask if meaning itself was ever real, or just an evolutionary illusion to keep you breathing. When you finally stop believing in belief, what's left to live for habit or fear of the void? Your mind quit first, but your body didn't get the message. It still breathes, still digests, still reaches for food and warmth, following ancient instincts that don't require belief. Psychologists might call this somatic persistence, the body's refusal to die, even when the mind has stopped participating. You lie still, feeling your heart pump like a stranger's engine, a mechanical rhythm detached from will. There's something obscene about its loyalty, this biological insistence on continuation. You've become a witness to your own survival, not its author. Each heartbeat feels like an unanswered question from a body that doesn't understand surrender. So tell me, if your body keeps living after your mind is left, who exactly is it living for? You no longer recognize the fear of the unknown. You only recognize the fear of yourself. Psychologists call this existential anxiety, the dread not of death, but of awareness without meaning. You've explored every corner of your mind, only to find its shadows have multiplied, and each one knows you better than you know yourself. Sleep offers no escape. Dreams are just rehearsals for the next day's numbness. The fear is no longer sharp. It's a constant wet weight pressing from inside, reminding you that awareness cannot be undone. Even the absence of hope carries its own terror. If the mind itself has become your adversary, who or what could ever be safe? You've grown accustomed to silence, but it does not comfort you. Psychologists describe hypervigilance as a heightened sensitivity to threat, but you've adapted it inward. Every pause in thought, every still moment, amplifies the absence you carry. The silence is filled with echoes of everything you never said, every emotion you swallowed, every life unlived. It screams in frequencies you cannot escape, a soundless wail threading through your mind, vibrating in corners too deep for words. You try to fill it with routines, distractions, small tasks, but the echo always returns, sharper, closer, personal. If silence is no longer empty, what is left to hear but the unspoken verdict of your own existence? You stare into yourself like an ocean, searching for substance, only to see waves that imitate form without holding it. Psychologists link this to metacognitive rumination, the obsessive reflection on thought itself, a hall of mirrors with no exit. Every insight loops back into doubt. Every revelation folds into confusion. You critique your feelings, your memories, your impulses, until even the act of reflection feels like betrayal. Your mind becomes a self-contained storm, spinning endlessly, generating tempests from its own currents. And yet, the storm is silent to the world, a private apocalypse that leaves no debris, no proof, no witnesses. When the hurricane is nothing but thought, is it fury or just proof of absence? You reach the edge without realizing there was ever a ground beneath you. Psychology calls this the culmination of existential fatigue, the point where cognition and emotion fracture under their own weight. You have traced every corner of yourself, counted every shadow, measured every pulse, and all you found is the pattern of your own erosion. The self you once nurtured, the dreams you once chased, the awareness you once prized, they were all scaffolding, holding you above a void you now see clearly. There is no redemption here, no insight to salvage, no next step that matters. Even memory bends, twisting the past into echoes of absence. And in the quiet, the question lingers, sharper than thought, darker than despair. When everything you are has dissolved, who remains to ask what it all meant?